Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Scott Darrell. I'm a board-certified chiropractic neurologist with a private practice here in Mequon, Wisconsin. And I'm excited to spend a couple minutes with you discussing different ways that I've learned to approach chronic pain as the years have gone by. I started my private practice in 2000. And after the first couple of years, I realized that various patients made it to a certain level and then often plateaued with chronic pain. Now, as a chiropractor, I had all types of great myofascial techniques as well as ultrasound and stim. And those were wonderful. As a functional neurologist, I had a lot of training that went into how do we help the brain and the body coordinate with balance and movement and eye movements and rhythm and timing. But a lot of patients got to a certain point after 5 to 10 visits where they just weren't making progress, and I got frustrated. Well, in walked a neurotransmitter test by one of my patients, and she said, Scott, you're going to learn all about hormones and all about neurotransmitters and figure out how it helps my nervous system work at the highest level it can. And from there, I learned that we can fuel people. We can fuel our patients if we understand how best to do it. So my hint at figuring out the best way to describe this information to patients, since I've been doing it since 2004, is to think about two different methodologies or two different arms, if you will, to various treatment plans. Number one, there's fuel. Number two, there's activation. Fuel is your lifestyle, it's your diet, it's your supplementation, sometimes it's your medications. And it's how it is with neurotransmitters and hormones specifically, in my practice a lot, whether we're talking about thyroid hormones, stress hormones, sex hormones, or neurotransmitters. How do we fuel you so that your nervous system and your endocrine system have plenty of fuel to rehabilitate? Activation is all of our manual and physical types of therapies, right? Whether it's a chiropractic adjustment, whether it's something that strengthens muscles, whether it's a myofascial release, it doesn't matter what it is. Some type of hands-on therapy or exercise therapy that's going to activate that nervous system and that biomechanical system. So fuel and activation. And so what I learned was that patients, as we all know, go through various stress responses, right? And I think about stress in three different ways. There's physical stress, like chronic pain. There's cognitive stress, such as I need to learn something new in school. And there's emotional stress, which we all have. And we all have various aspects of these three different arms of stress responses. So what happens physiologically? Physiologically, we see hormone and neurotransmitter systems kick into gear under stress, and eventually those systems with chronic stress fatigue. They can't simply stay responding at a high level of fight or flight or sympathetic response over the course of months and years. They're not designed for that in our modern day society. They're designed to either run from the bear or find shelter or actually kill the bear and eat it, right? And now we have stress that lasts years. And as that goes on and we start to fatigue various hormone and neurotransmitter systems, pain thresholds change. And what didn't used to be painful now hurts. And what didn't used to cause emotional challenges or low motivation, man, now it feels like it's such a heavy burden to actually do those exercises or want to rehabilitate myself. And this happens from various hormone and neurotransmitter systems. So what happens over time that I've observed is that when patients undergo a fight or flight response or a sympathetic nervous system response, various patients are going to fatigue various hormone and neurotransmitter systems at various rates. Now that sounds incredibly vague, and it's vague because that's what I've figured out over time. It used to be that people would say, well, just take a questionnaire and figure out if it's more serotonin or if it's more dopamine. It's not that simple. Based upon your own genetics, that will change your enzymes. It will change your methylation. It'll change how fast you manufacture neurotransmitters and how fast you break down neurotransmitters based upon your diet and your gut and what you eat. If you only eat pizza and chicken wings, it's going to be a much more inflammatory stress response with a faster breakdown in neurotransmitter and hormone systems than somebody who eats an all-organic, largely protein type of diet, right? Those are various different ways to fuel yourself. So, serotonin and GABA are largely calming and inhibiting. And on the opposite side of that, so if we have serotonin and GABA as calming on one side, there's a teeter-totter effect. On the other side is your catecholamines, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And serotonin and the catecholamines balance each other out all day long. With stress, if your fuel tanks are all topped up, and I like to refer to each of these hormones and neurotransmitters as a fuel tank in my office, if they're all looking pretty good and topped up and a stress response hit, you should be able to increase your output of all of these inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters and give yourself fuel to push through that stress response. And once the stress subsides, settle back down to a nice optimal range. But under chronic stress, what was once high helping you push through that stress response, eventually you start to fatigue out. Some patients will fatigue serotonin very quickly. Other patients will start to fatigue epinephrine or adrenaline very quickly. Other patients still might be cortisol as an anti-inflammatory hormone, right? Dependent upon that patient and dependent upon their own fatigability, it leads to a chronic stress response. And with chronic pain specifically, we like to look at serotonin and norepinephrine. Serotonin is largely used as an antidepressant neurotransmitter. It also has an incredibly important task with sleep regulation and helping you stay asleep. It also helps you pay attention to tasks long term so that when you're ready to sit down and actually do a mental task for a prolonged period of time, you can stay focused on that task and feel calm. If serotonin levels run low and or norepinephrine levels run low, we tend to feel more anxious, and that's not fun at all, right? The secondary effect from a pain perspective that it has is that serotonin and norepinephrine work from your brainstem down through your spinal cord, and they end on a synapse in your dorsal horn. That dorsal horn, of course, brings in all types of sensory information from your body peripherally. And if you are running low on the output of your serotonin and norepinephrine, you won't be able to inhibit pain fibers in your spinal cord at your dorsal horn. So you're going to find a lot of your chronic pain patients have either tried or are on antidepressants that affect how serotonin and norepinephrine are changed, serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, so it changes how they're recycled, to see if it helps their pain perception, because that's the mechanism at the spinal cord, and it also affects brain. We can use amino acid supplements, once we've had somebody tested, to replenish their serotonin and replenish their catecholamines so that hopefully they have nice optimal levels of total body output of serotonin and total body output of dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine based on these urine neurotransmitter tests, and you're going to see typically a wonderful parallel to how they respond to stress. And the neat thing is the stress response improves physically, meaning less pain and more energy. Cognitively, Scott, I can think clearer and pay attention to things easier and engage better with the world around me and just get things done quicker. And emotionally, right? And so all of that comes together from a stress response. And it's so important to think about how that trio, physical, cognitive, and emotional stress responses, all use the same neurotransmitters and the same stress hormones like cortisol and DHEA. And yes, thyroid is involved in that, and yes, sex hormones are involved in that. So I would argue very clearly that from a functional and integrative medicine perspective, if you are over 40, right, and you're moving towards either perimenopause or periandropause as a male, and your sex hormones are starting to slow down, that will just predispose you that much more to potentially having chronic pain. So, diet and lifestyle from a fuel and activation perspective, incredibly important, right? If all you're doing is eating pizza and ice cream, change that and see how far you can get. If you know that you need help with manual types of therapy and myofascial release because of chronic pain and you respond well to that, by all means, that's an important piece of the treatment plan. And then if you feel like you've plateaued and there's some type of history of either mood challenges, cognitive challenges, certainly insomnia or sleep challenges, motivational types of challenges, attention problems, those are great little red flags for thinking about neurotransmitters and hormone testing and optimization, in my mind at least, to figure out if we can bump those fuel tanks up a little bit and top them off with some various supplements, will it allow our various manual therapies and biomechanic approaches to get to the next level? And I think you'll find that it often does with our chronic pain patients. So one of the probably most consistent questions I get from patients, even before they start any of the testing and the supplementation, is, Scott, I'm almost concerned or scared or hesitant to do the test because what if I start and I started the supplementation, and even if I like it, am I going to have to be on it for the rest of my life? And the answer is Simple and yet complicated, all rolled into one. The simple answer is no, you won't necessarily need to be on it for the rest of your life. But the more complicated answer is, if you're going to continue your particular lifestyle, where you are a type A personality, and you are doing the standard American lifestyle of working 16 hours a day, right, between family and between work, and just burning the candle at both ends, you're probably going to feel your best if you're on some type of excitatory, adrenal type of catecholamine support in the morning and some inhibitory serotonin support at night while you sleep. Because you're going to burn through that fuel at a high rate during the day with your continued high stress lifestyle. The good news is, if you can change your lifestyle, find a job that makes you happier, right? Heal a relationship that's been hard for you for a long time. Find some different peace with your children, or maybe you finally get through that hard age, right? You know, they were from 2 to 4 years old. It was just absolutely awful, Scott. Now that they're 5, they're calmer, and I don't feel like I need these supplements the same way. You can either choose to retest and confirm that these levels have improved on their own, or you can say, well, it looks like you'll still feel better on a little bit of inhibitory excitatory support. So I guess my basic core answer is no, you won't necessarily need them for the rest of your life. But the longer answer is, depending upon if you're willing to change your lifestyle, is going to dictate whether or not you're going to burn through this fuel at a faster rate or a slower rate, in which case you may not need as many supplements for as long. When we start to talk about various aspects of the nervous system and the GI system, or gut health, and how diet affects this, you have this wonderful super system called your NEI super system. It stands for neurology, endocrinology, and immunology. And those three systems play off of each other all day long. So when we're talking about gut, we're talking about more inflammatory immune system. And when we're talking about nervous system, of course, we're talking more neurotransmitters. Now, the neat thing is, your entire body uses neurotransmitters to move all of your muscles and to help your gut actually with motility, right? To make everything work, your brain and your body use neurotransmitters all day long. So here's what happens. With a super pro-inflammatory diet, if you're eating foods consistently that are, low grade and just don't have a lot of quality proteins in them, and they're high inflammatory with high sugar all day long, what happens there is that your gut tends to get angry and release a lot of pro-inflammatory chemicals, which will tend to increase a neurotransmitter called glutamate from your dendritic cells in your gut. And again, this is a little deeper than maybe you want to go, but glutamate is super excitatory, but yet it causes the brain a lot of brain fog. So it's inflammatory and causes the body to be in pain, and it also causes the brain itself to be in brain fog and feel tired at the same time. It's a lot like histamine, actually. If any of you have experienced a seasonal allergy where all of a sudden your histamine levels are high, chances are your motivation wasn't real high, your attention span wasn't real high. You may have noticed that various parts of your muscles and joints hurt more. Glutamate behaves very similarly, and glutamate levels being high from a pro-inflammatory diet doesn't feel good neurologically and doesn't feel good immunologically. So a lot of people will change their diet, change their gut, and watch their biomechanics system improve dramatically from a chronic pain perspective. And that should always be where people start, right? I mean, lifestyle medicine should always be a great first step for everybody before you go down the road towards neurotransmitters and hormones and more advanced testing. But if you've already done a lot of the hard work, I tend to attract patients that have already done a lot of the hard work with their gut and their diet and their lifestyle, and they're still saying, I hurt, I don't sleep well, my attention span isn't great, my mood isn't great, where else can I turn to help myself? And that's where neurotransmitters and hormone testing and optimization probably plays a nice part. Okay, we're going to go into the stress response just a little bit with chronic stress, because early on in stress, in a perfect world, you have neurotransmitter and hormone systems that are sitting at a pretty optimal level on these tests. Total body output, urine neurotransmitters, salivary hormone levels, and a stressor hits. And if you test somebody in the early weeks of that stress response, we would expect their hormones and neurotransmitter systems to be dumping out lots of hormones and neurotransmitters to give you fuel for your fight or flight nervous system to push through. Now, as time goes on, all of these systems start to fade away and they fatigue. You just can't continue the fight or flight system for years, especially if the traumas have either been multiple in a row, right? Or one very, very large trauma that you'll probably never get over, the death of a loved one who was incredibly close to you, for example. So you want to work through that. in terms of the cognitive side and the emotional side with coaching and psychologists and psychiatrists and talk therapy, of course. And understand that with that chronic stress, you move through early, middle, and late stage fatigue in terms of these metabolic markers, these biomarkers. And if somebody's in a late stage fatigue, where cortisol rhythms, instead of being high in the morning and low at night, they're just low all day long, that's very hard to bounce yourself out of. And if you all of a sudden have a serotonin level that's just running on fumes and a dopamine level that's running on fumes and norepinephrine and epinephrine, and they're all just low, 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 it's very hard to eat your way out of that, right? It's very hard to sleep your way out of that. You really do need supplementation to try to refill your fuel tanks so that your serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine and adrenaline levels all come back up. Chronic stress patients tend to have chronic pain, chronic mood challenges, and they'll usually report that their cognition's just not nearly as easy as it used to be. That may be something that you experience from some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't throw that term around lightly. I think people can get PTSD from all various types of trauma in their life, and it's very, very complicated. But certainly, if you are a PTSD patient and you experience chronic pain, and you have some of these other different symptoms where neurotransmitters and hormone systems really shine to support you feeling better, such as insomnia and sleep challenges, brain fog and cognitive challenges, mood challenges, and fatigue or energy challenges, this is a wonderful place to start because chances are that patient is running on an end-stage fatigue where neurotransmitters and hormones as a whole are just running on fumes. And in that case, when you can start to refuel somebody, you can really start to make some neat changes in terms of myofascial and manual therapies, balance, rehab, motor planning, and even the motivation to exercise and move again, right? And now they're hopefully sleeping better through the night, which changes their entire outlook on life. So all of these systems play well together. And that's a little bit on how you want to map with chronic stress early, middle, and late stage stress responses from a biochemistry perspective to see where we are with serotonin and GABA and dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine. If we go a little bit deeper into that concept of early, middle, and late stage fatigability and biomarker metabolic stress responses, we start to say, well, why is it that patient A may go from feeling healthy to totally crashed in 3 weeks after stress, and patient B may go from feeling pretty good to, man, I've been under severe stress for 10 years, and I'm still able to work, and I'm still getting through what I need to do. I just wish I felt better as a whole. Why does somebody crash fast and somebody else crashes slow? And this gets a little more detailed, and some of the basic general ideas behind this are genetics as well as lifestyle. So if I give you patient A, again, who only eats ice cream and pizza and pro-inflammatory foods and high carbohydrates and poor fats, right? They're probably going to go through early, middle, and late stage stress responses faster because their immune system and their inflammatory system isn't being fueled with the proper diet. And I think we would all agree that that is a big hurdle to get over. But what about somebody else who's already cleaned up their diet and their gut, and they're still running on fumes? Well, maybe that has to do with their genetics. We have genetics that are involved called methylation, and methylation genetics are involved in how we make our monoamine neurotransmitters, which are serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So if you're a suboptimal methylator, you might have a couple of things working against you. Genetically, you may be prone to more inflammation. You may not necessarily be as easy or healthy of a detoxifier in general, and you may not make neurotransmitters as easy as the next person who is a better methylator. Now that's the methylation side. That's how we make neurotransmitters. What about how we break them down? This gets into two different neurotransmitter enzyme systems called COMT and MAO. And there are medications called MAO inhibitors, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which aren't used very often, but they are used occasionally for mood challenges, severe mood challenges. Genetically, if you are somebody whose enzyme systems degrade neurotransmitters quickly, you are going to make neurotransmitters at a certain rate based on your methylation, right, genetics, and then you're going to degrade them and eat them up at a certain rate based on your COMT and MAO enzyme genetics. So you might progress early, middle, and late stage quicker if your genetics are stacked against you. And those people may need supplementation for a much longer period of time, maybe the rest of their life, to feel the very best that they can. So if there are patients who don't respond to various neurotransmitter and hormone therapies, and they're already doing a really good job with their diet and their lifestyle, and they're doing everything they're supposed to from a biomechanic perspective, then I think it's worth looking at some of those functional genetic markers to get a little bit deeper dive on it. But for the rest of us, most of us will respond to a certain extent to lifestyle. Most of us will respond to hands-on therapies and different types of manual-based therapies to feel better from a chronic pain perspective. And then the question is, do you need something a little bit more to help refuel your fuel tanks up from a metabolic perspective with hormones and neurotransmitters, because the chronic stress over the course of years has just depleted your fuel tanks?
I loved what got me was how you shared serotonin comes from the brainstem.
Serotonin and norepinephrine inhibits pain fibers.
If we don't have enough of it, it won't inhibit the peripheral pain receptors. That's like boom.
Yeah, which is why so many chronic pain patients have been on antidepressants first, because they're trying to bump up serotonin and norepinephrine through changing the recycling mechanism versus us using amino acids so that you make more of your own. I think when I think about chronic pain patients, I tend to think about plasticity happening in a bad way. So that pain system, that entire pain processing system, proprioceptively, and then secondarily how pain is processed in the brain emotionally, becomes very strong, and it takes very little for the system, the fight or flight nervous system, as well as the pain system, to be stimulated in a way that it becomes turned on at a faster rate. And so that's plasticity done wrong. That's neuroplasticity that got stuck in suboptimal patterns that ultimately ended in poor pain processing that takes a long time to unwind and retrain how it's done. And I always tell patients that with chronic pain, one of the neat things is that hopefully with each additional day and each additional week, and then certainly each additional month that you don't have a lot of pain, your whole system has rewired itself to now that your new norm is pain-free and pain is abnormal. Versus initially when you presented, you were used to pain being the norm because that's how you got wired after some type of trauma, physical, cognitive, or emotional. I think a lot of times when we work with chronic pain patients, we tend to recognize that our pain patients, as they start to get healthier and feel better, they're often very concerned that everything might come flooding back. What if, right? They're stuck in this worst case scenario. Well, yeah, Scott, I had a better week, but what if it all comes crushing back next week and I just have a horrible week where I can't get out of bed again? And that happens sometimes. But the neat thing about the brain and the nervous system is that it's very plastic. What does that mean? It means it can rewire and grow new connections all the time, and you can strengthen these connections. Now, sometimes plasticity goes wrong, and neuroplasticity learns that chronic pain is now the new norm, where every day a patient wakes up and says, yeah, my norm is that I'm in pain all day long. When you start to break that cycle with myofascial techniques and with various exercise protocols and different types of manual therapies of all sorts, right? As well as potentially some of this neurotransmitter and hormone stuff, whatever your tools are in your toolbox that you choose to work with, and that patient starts to get some pain-free hours and then some pain-free days and then hopefully eventually some pain-free weeks, they still may be concerned about, well, what if it only takes a little bit of stimulus, a little bit of kindling, a little bit of stress to refire all those pain pathways again, and I come crumbling down. And if you notice that that's the pattern that happens over time, where they can get 1 week that's good and then 1 week that's bad, or 2 weeks that are good and then all of a sudden they crash for 2 days, that's a good time to be thinking outside the box beyond maybe just biomechanical, at least in my mind. Because in that case, a little bit of stress of some sort tends to fire those old plastic pain pathways and fight or flight stress mechanisms. And all of a sudden that pain comes rushing back in because the neuroplasticity that the brain used to work with, that we want it to forget, right, is fired up again very, very easily. And a lot of times if you can bring people out of that end stage stress response with neurotransmitters and hormone support and helping them build more of their own neurotransmitters and build more of their own hormones, then all of a sudden it doesn't take, or rather it takes a lot more stimulus, a lot more stress, a lot more jolt physically to actually cause those pain fibers and those pain pathways to start to fire again. So that's another way of just thinking about chronic pain, from a watching that brain work. And if that brain is always worried about, well, yeah, it was a good week, but what if it comes back next week? That's probably a good time to start thinking outside of the usual biomechanic world and start to go a little bit broader into more of the metabolic chemical world of neurotransmitters and hormones.